Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show with the laciest and raciest dirty laundry. I'm Christy Powell, and my guest tonight has absolutely heard all of your dirty secrets and is back to tell us more. Phone sex operator and adult industry expert, Amberly Rothfield.
Thank you so much, and I am so stoked to be back. I absolutely adore you guys here at Secular Sexuality. Wow, I'm so flabbergasted. I can't even talk right.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate it. I am very excited for the audience who hasn't met you and who hasn't gotten a sense of maybe your role in organizing sex workers, and then just your incredible experience around phone sex operating. We're going to get into it tonight. It's going to get a little bit dirty. It's going to get a little bit messy, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
That's how I like it. So
right, that's why we're here. Yeah. So let's do the thing. Yeah, we're unpacking our kinks and dropping off our luggage. So give us a call. You can call the show at 512-991-9242. That's 512-991-9242. Or you can try us at tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is starting right now. All right. Amberly, a few years ago, we talked to Brittany Lee, a.k.a. BBW Cutie Pie, about her work as a phone sex operator. And she talked to us a lot about how this was really an opportunity for folks to explore maybe more taboo or adventurous kinks. In particular, we talked on that episode a lot about vor. But yourself, as perhaps the most accomplished phone sex operator ever, I'm sure you've really seen some things.
That is a fucking accolade, and I will snatch that. Yeah, no. So like in the phone sex world, especially, and like a lot of people think it's dead. Nay. She never died. She never even died down. It changed, it morphed over the years, but really the reason why it will never change is because when someone calls me, they're calling someone that they have no idea who they are, and I have no idea who you are. There is no way for this to get back. It's funny, you were talking about dirty laundry, and yeah, everybody's got dirty laundry, but there's no way for me to be able to know whose laundry this is, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So because of that, we can be a lot of my clients especially felt safer to be able to come to me and be able to tell me about the stuff that there is no way they could even bring that up to their potential, not even just potential, but like their significant others have no idea these kinks that they're even interested in exploring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so to that end, I guess you do get the impression then that a lot of callers don't really have many, if any, other outlets in expressing these needs. Is that the case?
I don't even know if it's just the people who call me, but if you think about it, everybody feels that way. I'm sure there's stuff you don't feel comfortable with most people in your circles necessarily knowing.
Sure, yeah.
Especially if it's exploration. It's something that you thought of one time and you thought was really hot, and you're like, I don't know if it's my thing. I want to try on this dress. I don't know if she's going to fit, and I don't know if I want my friends to see me try it on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's safer to explore that with someone who doesn't know who you are, doesn't know how to bring this back on you in some way. There's no way that this is ever going to come back up again, if that makes sense. I say that a lot. I need to stop saying if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, we're here for it. We get it, and yeah, let's tease this apart a little bit. I mean, what kinds of fantasies are people bringing to you, or maybe the things that you see? Not exclusively for sure, but perhaps especially in a phone type of situation, or any time where you're using voice rather than other forms of pornography or sexual exploration.
Sure. So I used to take all types of calls, no matter what you're calling me about. I would take the call with one particular company I worked with, and now, after having had that experience for a few years and knowing what I worked better with, I market myself for very specific types of calls, which they're the type of calls that a lot of other phone sex providers may not want to take. Um, because it takes an understanding of not only that particular kink, but also because and when I say understanding, like understanding why people are there, what they would like out of it, and also the safety parameters of how to ensure that you don't overstep a boundary, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to be, I'm allowed to say the types on this show, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Please, let's dive in. I guess I'll just go ahead and mention to the audience that we are going to be talking about some of the nitty gritty, and I don't know that we're going to get into super detail or graphic descriptions necessarily, but this is important conversation and something that I know can be a little challenging, but that is really worth spending some time getting accustomed to. Even if these aren't your kinks, and even if you yourself have no intentions on pursuing some of these things, this is a world that I feel like many of us have been kind of sheltered from and have worked really hard to alienate and other people regarding. And I'd like to be part of seeing that change a little bit tonight.
100%. So, my specialty area, not saying that I don't take calls outside of this, but it's my area. It's like a doctor can also probably, a podiatrist can also tell you have a cold.
Sure, yeah.
But they are really good at, podiatry. So I specialize in black male fantasy, black male fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I like to emphasize that because you are safe. I don't look good in orange, so I'm not going to jail. Manipulation, I call it hip nonsense because what I do is not hypnosis, but hypnosis fantasy,
Sure.
mind control fantasy, like the Alex Jones, except absolutely ridiculous. Actually, he's still absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, hi.
You didn't have to go to court in order to prove that everything that you were saying was just nonsense that was made up. You label it that way from the gate. Got it.
Out the jump, I tell you that I'm just horsing around. So I do like mind control, but also I dabble a little bit in. Well, I shouldn't say dabble. I talk to people with ABDL. When I say like abduction fantasies and stuff like that, again, abduction fantasy. I'm not in the habit of abducting people. Donuts, yes. People, no. But so a lot of the fantasies that people find to be a little bit darker, and I forgot the term that you used earlier, but I'm going to start using it more if I can remember it. Where you were like the deep, dark, seedy type fantasies. Those are the ones that are kind of my go-to. And it goes back to, again, when I say the understanding. I have a very dark upbringing that I would wish upon not even my worst enemies, but because of that, I can go. It's kind of like Stephen King writes horror based off of his childhood experiences and everything. He's really good at it because of that. Similar, I draw upon my trauma. I draw upon my trauma and a very abusive background, and it makes it to where I understand what someone may be looking for if that's the type of thing that they're seeking, and I can deliver it in a safe place. And I also, again, know not to go too far. Again, it goes back to the whole being safe, but I can give them the experience that they're looking for. And also frankly, it's empowering for me because it means that I don't have to deal with this ish. I get to be the one in the driver's seat in this case. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial thing. But so yay.
Yeah.
Now I look like a psychopath.
Right? No, let's dive into that because you just mentioned a bunch of different labels and adjectives, and I'd love to unpack them a little bit. But before we do, I think it's important to highlight a lot of what you're talking about, which is that these are fantasies. Sometimes they are fantasies that people may even want to act out in real life. And by real life, I still mean in a playful, controlled type of environment. But a maybe safer or easier way to get to that place of exploration is through voice, through phone sex and these different types of exploration. Ultimately, though, before we start to really describe what a lot of those words you were saying actually mean, I really think it's important to impress upon the audience that we're talking about play. We're talking about fantasy, and it's natural and human to want to eroticize your fears. Dan Savage uses the term playing cops and robbers with no pants on when we're talking about BDSM, because there is a natural human instinct for play. There is a natural human instinct for fake violence, if we can call it that. Amberly, before the show, we were talking a little bit about just watching dogs play with each other, and how if you are not used to being around dogs, it looks like real violence, and it can be very scary in that way. And so as we're getting into all of this, I just want to gently remind the audience that we are talking about fantasy, that we are talking about play, and we're going to perhaps use some uncomfortable language, and I'll go ahead and just acknowledge that here at the start. But in all of these things, we're talking about the gamified version of it, and that's just a natural mammalian habit that we all have, and that we can have a little bit of fun with as these like sophisticated, very fancy primates with suits and the internet and telephones. And we have all these different ways to explore it, but we're really just tapping into our basic biology here.
Absolutely. 10,000%. I definitely wanted to bring that up. Because again, it's play. It's not about traumatizing anybody. Big thing. And I've mentioned this on other podcasts where there was a period when I first started and I didn't actually understand what clients were looking for and everything, where I did do things that I absolutely regret now that I am a more learned, that's not a word, Amberly.
Works for me. I'm with you.
But yeah, now that I understand kink a lot more, because I did get into this industry when I was 18, straight off the turnip truck, didn't understand it. And because I didn't understand what I was getting into, I went too far. And I think that's why it's important to have these conversations now, so we can make it to where other people, we destigmatize the things that people are into. So that it's okay for people to go get more information. Because I know when I first started, it wasn't just that I was ignorant for funsies. There was just no information on this type of stuff, so you could actually learn more about it. When I first started out in the early 2000s, I'm old.
Yeah, well, I'll go ahead and let people know that your story about getting into phone sex was something that we really talked about last summer, and I'm going to point people towards that episode because it's sincerely one of the ones I'm most proud of, and that I have, kind of held out when I show, friends that are interested, and hey, what's this thing you're always doing on Thursday nights? It's worth checking out. So I'll make sure that the link for that is in the show notes to this episode, and otherwise, I'd like, if we can, to go ahead and describe and unpack some of these things. You mentioned in particular blackmail fantasy, and I feel like on the surface that might be somewhat straightforward, but let's dive into it a little bit.
You would think it's straightforward, but there is the nuance,
Sure.
the nuance when it comes to blackmail fantasy. So again, particularly good at this because thanks, Mom. She was a great. She did not understand the fantasy part of it. So it goes back to at least, and again, I'm no clinician. I have not gone to school for this. I've just studied it over 20 years of talking to people on the phone. And most people that want that type of fantasy is I find most of them to be super, super, how to explain? They tend to be super powerful people in real life. They tend to be CEOs. They tend to be, again, people that just have a ton of power. And so they want, actually, really with most really seedy kinks, it's someone who is the complete opposite of what they're into. Like when it comes to ABDL, usually, again, super powerful person, super masculine.
And just real quickly, since we've said that a few times, I'm sure we'll unpack it more, but we're talking about an adult baby or a diaper lover fetish.
Yes. Sorry. I always forget people
Oh,
don't know.
we have all sorts. There are absolutely people watching this show that have been scratching their head for the last 15 minutes going, "What is ABDL?" And then I absolutely am convinced there are folks who are like, "Yeah, let's talk more about that."
No, 100%. But yeah, with blackmail, there's a lot of nuance to it, because a lot of times it's not just someone who wants the fantasy and the here and the now. Oh yeah, I've got this secret. Tell me what you would do to me. A lot of times it's actually, more often than not, it's someone who wants a ongoing relationship where you manipulate the information out of them. And it's not just a one and done type thing. It's you going on this journey of talking to someone night after night, extracting more information out of them, being this ultimate femme fatale, if that makes any sense. I think that's the closest thing that I can think about when it comes like to movies that you can compare the two.
Yeah.
And it's making that client feel as if they don't, it's making them feel like they don't have power, because I still kind of have power from just handing over all of my information and you go off and do with it whatever you want to, versus if I feel like you're taking it out of me, I'm putting up some kind of stop, which goes into the consent thing, which a lot of people, when we talk blackmail fantasy, they're like, oh, but what about consent? Well, as long as someone is very clearly labeling, with any kink, I think that's important. Clearly label what you're into. If I'm into blackmail fantasy, I'm kind of saying consensual non-consent.
Sure. Yeah.
But also lay out the stuff that's too far. Don't actually contact my goddamn family, but make me feel like you would. Don't do X, Y, and Z. I think that's really, really important to have those conversations up front before you dive into anything. Otherwise, you're going to end up in murky waters of, what do I do now? How do I make this work? So, yeah. Consent, getting consent and having those talks early are exceptionally important whenever you're going to get into these consensual, non-consent type of kinks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's just kind of go down the list if we can and give folks sort of a little bit of a crash course on some of the things that we're talking about. And then we're going to have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation about how to unpack some of these things. If this is you, if we are describing something that you're interested in and you're struggling with, how do I tell my partner about this? Will I ever find a partner who's interested in this with me? And how do you have those conversations? That's where I'd like to go next. But before we do, tell us a little bit more, I suppose, about what an ABDL fantasy actually looks like, or at least what it looks like through phone sex operator, through voice.
Sure. And also I do have experience with it real time as well. But yeah, so ABDL, again, it's kind of a consensual non-consent type kink, because you have someone who is, adult baby diaper lover. So they are playing the part of being a baby, someone, wearing a diaper. You are the authoritarian, you are over this person. You tell them how to dress, you feed them, you give them nap time, you change their diapers, you're giving them pacifiers, so on and so forth. Again, you have to get a layout of what is too far, especially since a lot of times with ABDL, there's some sort of punishment like spankings and stuff like that. You need to have those conversations first up front. But on the phone, typically it's just talking out fantasies, and it's not as dangerous as blackmail, because you're not dealing with someone's real information.
Sure.
And honestly, it's a little bit more safer, because if someone's totally not digging it, they can just hang up and you're fine.
Right. Yeah, you have that immediate out button, that immediate safety word.
Exactly. That's, a hang up is a great, and actually it's interesting you said safety word, because we were going to touch on that too.
Mm-hmm.
I loved what you said before the show. I think that's how I'm going to use it to describe to people from now on, which is no is always a no, unless you negotiate prior to that. It doesn't, because sometimes it is a defiant thing. I want to be punished, therefore, I've never been on the receiving end of ABDL. I've always been the authoritarian, but sometimes like a client wants to tell me no, and it's not because they don't want to do something. It's because they want that punishment. They want what it's furthering the role play aspect. So you have to be able to distinguish between the two. And that's where having these conversations beforehand of if you say no, and then I usually the way I work it up, everyone's different. If you say no, I will tell you if you tell me the word no and it's not we're in a role play situation, I'm going to follow it up with the question. And if I follow it up with the question, you better say yes, or no. If you say that means you want to say no, but in a defiant way. So you're still being defiant. You still feel like you're being a little brat. But if you say no the second time, that means absolutely that's the stopgap. That's the we're not going to proceed down that road. And it's little things like that that you can work into where it doesn't stop the flow of your play, if that makes any sense. But it also allows you to be able to respect those no's. Because again, if you basically I'm questioning your no, not as a like I'm questioning it in a consent way, but like, are you doing it to be a brat? Or are you doing it because it's a consent violation? I'm just double checking.
Yeah, no, that's an important thing to highlight. We were talking just a little bit before the show about how, on a show like this, when everything is sort of this like tongue-in-cheek, sexified atmosphere, we often throw around, pineapple and we talk about safety words in this sort of casual way, which is totally great and nothing that I apologize for. But I do think that oftentimes we miss out on the fact that you don't use a safety word in kink generally. It is something that has like a very specifically defined usage when no is no longer your safety word.
A lot of times when people are in a situation where it's a no, at least in my experience, I'm only speaking from my experience, when you want to say no and it is an absolute no, it's more of a, I wouldn't say you're in a trauma, you're heading down a bad path. And a lot of times we forget what that safety word is. If your safety word is something like farfel nougat, and it's not a word you use frequently, you might not go to grab that word, that's where the following up the no. It's not that I'm questioning your no. I'm questioning whether or not we're continuing with the role play, or is this like a hard, like you are actually asking me to stop? Because it can be hard when you're doing role play type situations. And even if it's a very vanilla one, to know, is this actually a no, or are we acting out?
To keep that switch flipped in your brain. Yeah, and it's important to make it feel fluid and easy for everybody, because otherwise people are going to be more hesitant to use it, and that's going to make the dom in that situation feel a little bit more hesitant to really push the boundaries, which, is oftentimes what we're there to do. So before we jump into calls, I wanted to see if there were any more of these adjectives or any more of these kinks that you could just sort of briefly describe for the audience. I wanted to make sure to at least talk about financial domination, or what people might recognize as findom, and then anything else you feel like might be good to highlight here.
In chat, at least on YouTube, I saw someone mention exhibitionism. That is one that I consider kind of down the dark, seedy path. Sure. When I do that, I'm not saying it's bad. Like, dark and seedy to me is like, that's my room.
Right. Yeah.
I live here.
The goth kinks.
Exactly. But I saw someone mention that in chat, like, where does consent fall into there? I strictly only run with exhibitionism type kinks in spaces like I think in Vegas there's a place called Red Rooster, where it's like it's a swingers place where it's perfectly fine. Once you go past a certain point, sex everywhere. But everyone knows that. Like it's a well-known fact, and they tell you before they go in. I don't believe in getting naked on the side of roads or
Right.
hiking.
The
Yeah.
difference here is that everybody inside of that building has gone through a paywall and has
Yeah.
expressed their consent to be looking at naked bodies. Whereas folks that are just driving down the road, they have not consented to participate in your kink. So if you're not in some sort of play space or a topless beach or some other place where it is prescribed to be nude here, then you
Hmm.
are violating the consent of the people around you. And we can get into some nuanced conversations
Yeah.
about how we should feel about nudity as a society and these different things. But as it stands, there are absolutely laws against nudity in most public spaces. And so
Yeah.
people have a reasonable expectation to not be exposed to naked bodies.
Exactly. If I go into a space, I should know the rules and I should know what I'm consenting to go into that space. So
Yeah.
that's where I leave that at. Um, and like if someone has a fantasy about that, if a guy calls me, I've learned to be very careful because I used to think some stuff I told dudes was a fantasy. I have a McDonald's story. I I gave him when I say I gave him instructions, I wasn't giving him permission to do this. I thought we were working out
Yeah. In a
a
fantasy
role.
space.
Yeah, I thought we were in a role play. No, no. His mute game was perfect. I didn't know he was in the car, and he drove to a McDonald's drive-through and enacted the fantasy. And
Mm.
when I found that out later, I was horrified because you just violated someone's consent, and I feel accomplice to it somehow.
Sure. Yeah. And
Yeah,
you mentioned being new to the field at a certain point and that these are some of the
this
things that you learn.
this
And
was then.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's just again worth highlighting that if we as a society are uncomfortable with having these conversations, then we're not going to provide this type of information to, new practitioners of phone sex lines or to the general public. And so people who are curious about wanting to explore in a ethical and responsible and healthy way don't necessarily have great access to resources. So again, I
300%.
I recognize that a lot of folks listening to this may be a little bit uncomfortable, and I don't want to keep highlighting that or make it weird in that way. But I do want to say that it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. If you do decide that this episode is not for you, great. We'll see you next week. It's going to be a great time then, too.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
we
It's
respect
okay.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we absolutely respect that, but I want to challenge everybody to get just a little bit more literate, a little bit more comfortable, and to work towards moving the needle on providing, I guess, access and safe space for everybody to explore their sexuality. Now
exactly.
we've got to
Sorry, go
please
ahead.
go right ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say just briefly on financial domination, same thing
Mhm.
there. Parameters, because a lot of people think it's really quick, fast money. You just do an L sign, say loser, and guys drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on you. Can that happen? Absolutely. Um, it can. I mean, I could also win the lottery. But understanding that, because a lot of people that want financial domination want you, they give you access to their bank accounts, to their credit cards. This is part of the fantasy, and you have to know how to control that, not just from a being kind to the person that you're practicing a kink with, but also laws. There's law. Like,
Right. Yeah.
don't go catch a charge just because you wanted $100. Don't do that. Just good advice. But it's also, you need to understand the kinks that you're in and that you're practicing. And I wish that was something I was told way earlier, which is get yourself educated before you jump out of a plane. You need a
Mm-hmm.
parachute. So yeah.
Sure. Cool.